A very, very warm welcome to you and thank you so much for taking the time out to be a part of this event. Since time is of essence, we will begin with the first segment of the event immediately. You can see the lineup of speakers in the screen in front of you. Our event is divided into two segments. One is a high-level segment and the other is a technical segment. The high-level segment, we will look at like high-level policy, global level thinking, and in the technical segment, all the partners and applicants will be making presentation from their work on the topic of just energy transitions and SDGs. So thank you again, and I would now like to request the chair of this event to give the opening remarks, but before that, very briefly introducing Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri. He's been a career diplomat and a very long time climate negotiator. He's been a part of many landmark COPs, including Bali, including Copenhagen. And so we are very happy that he'll be like chairing this session. Over to you, Ambassador Puri.
Shailly, thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for coming here. And thank you for telling the world that this is an old guy you've got here to chair the session. Thank you. But I've got good partners here.
Also old.
I didn't say that.
In crime.
I want to start by welcoming also Professor Takeuchi here, an old-time associate of TERI and somebody who we are very proud of having on our International Steering Committee for the World Sustainable Development Summit. Sir, thank you. I will say welcome to everybody here, certainly, but you are extremely special for us. Friends, I want to tell you all another thing. This is the only session at this COP where actually we've built in a few minutes for questions and answers from the audience. All other sessions are about people saying what they want to say. They're really not bothered about anyone else. We are bothered about you. So please put all these people on the hold. You are going to be important for all of us. Now, I'll say things as we get along. You know the agenda, the just energy transition and SDGs. Very important for the whole world, but I must say particularly important for large developing countries, and my country, India, stands at the very top of that. Why? Because we have to transition, but we have to ensure that we have development, because our development imperatives still continue to be tremendous, no matter the fact that we are the largest country, on our way to becoming the third largest economy, and so on and so forth. But for us, these things are particularly important. And I'm therefore very delighted to welcome you here on behalf of TERI, the TERI School of Advanced Studies, on behalf of the Asia Society Policy Institute, on behalf of CICERO, all of them, and everybody else on the panel. Since we have limited time, no matter those 15 minutes, I'm going to ask Dr. Vibha Dhawan, who's the Director General of TERI, to deliver her welcome remarks. Dr. Dhawan.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Puri and Shailly, and I'll say all of you to be here, because I know what COP is. You're running from one place to the other, and that definitely shows that you are really interested in the topic. On behalf of TERI School of Advanced Studies, CICERO and ASPI, I welcome you all and to this event on just energy transition and SDGs, tools and enablers. Well, we all are talking of climate change, and yesterday when we were with the IPCC chair, one thing which he mentioned, that there is surely an implementation gap. We are talking, or rather, the temperatures are rising much above what we thought. It is also that we are predicting an increase of GHGs by 5% by 2030, while a minimum reduction of 4% is needed. So that is what shows us the gap. And as we are entering the phase of strenuous negotiations at COP, it is pertinent to focus on achieving inclusive, just and equitable transition. It's also important to consider specific needs, whether financial or technological, for the global south. And at the recently concluded G20 summit in India, countries recognized the need for just energy transition, and that development models that we need to develop must ensure sustainable, inclusive, and just transition globally and leave no one behind. And that's very pertinent in today's world, because maybe 20, 30 years back, it was something like you come back from US and people will ask you, how do people live there? But today, if you look at the Apple phone, it's released on the same day globally. And therefore, people's aspirations are also increasing. And if they cannot afford that, somewhere it is that you cannot have a global peace. So that is also essential, that no one is left behind, and we must be working in that direction. The G20 declaration also categorically mentioned the need for US dollar close to 6 trillion in the pre-2030 period for developing countries to implement the NDCs, and the need for US dollar about 4 trillion for clean energy technologies by 2030. And that's what we are looking at. Where is the money? Where it's going to come from? What are the promises we are making, and will they be implementable? The existing approach, unfortunately, does not consider differences in resource, endowment, and security among countries. To encourage inclusive, just and equitable transition towards clean energy, along with financial support, there is also need to look at the availability of critical minerals. Also, in a way, the waste disposal and maybe recycling of minerals, which will become crucial. And we must also, on the demand side, look at the buyers in MSMEs and interface with the Sustainable Development Goals. The panel discussions, and even today, discuss various perspectives on tools such as climate finance, green budgeting, social protection, addressing inequalities, and their role in promoting just transition. As the negotiations heat up, I sincerely hope that the focus remains on moving trillions in climate finance and not billions. Over to you, sir, Mr. Ambassador Puri.
Dr. Dhawan, thank you very much. And thank you very much for laying out, the very basis. Look, transitions are by definition difficult. But it is extremely important that transitions are just, fair, equitable, and if I dare say, affordable.
Yeah.
In today's world, we are not talking about transitions among equals. We are talking about transitions among people who have actually accepted differentiation. So, as we were starting this panel, Dr. Mathur, who is an old friend of mine, leaned across to me and said that when his parents went to the United States several decades back, they were asked whether Indians lived on trees. These are facts. I'm saying this to you because it's an understanding of the way things are. And look at where our country has come today. But the amount of change and the transition costs are tremendous. I'll say something to you that, many people would say is kind of not very politically correct. But if you take the largest 10 developing economies, emerging economies, and there is just and fair and affordable energy transition in those countries, it would have perhaps the greatest impact in the world, other than the actions which the developed world has to take, which in any case they must take. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to invite you all, because it's time for us to launch the Act for Earth and the WSDS program and this entire wonderful paper which has been put together by TERI and its team here. So may I invite all those who are listed here among the speakers who are not on the panel here to join us for the group photograph and for us to have this particular launch. Professor Takeuchi, you of course must come. Please come. Please come here. No, here. Please come, stand here. Please come. So now that we are wearing ties and jackets, we better get our act together. Yeah.
I'm hoping that this will also get us many contracts. What? This photograph with you, Vibha, the least it will do.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, Shailly, are there any other announcements to be made at this stage, or can we launch straight into the panel? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you that we have an absolute star-studded panel here. And I want to again draw your attention. What they will say is important, but I think what you may ask them will be perhaps more probing and may get you to understand what lies behind their thinking. Our panel today consists of Dr. Ajay Mathur, who is the Director General of the International Solar Alliance, this massive international body which India and France have helped set up together for the world, and today has something more than 100 countries as its members.
118 as of day before yesterday.
118 countries. Congratulations to you, Ajay. We are also very fortunate. Ajay used to be Director General at TERI before that and helped set up the Bureau of Energy Efficiency in India, so comes with tremendous credentials. And today we'll talk to you about solar power. Yesterday, Jim Skia, the IPCC chairman, when he was pointing out to us that, my God, we are headed towards 1.5, and then the hope, and the hope's greatest blue line was in solar power. So Ajay, that's going to be you. I want to tell you, we have Mr. Ramesh Subramaniam here, the Asian Development Bank. We can keep talking about many things in the world, but frankly, if you don't have the money, you ain't going to go places. Neither for technology nor for anything else, unless the apple falls on your head. So you are extremely important for this. And then we have Mr. Fabby Tumiwa, Executive Director of the Institute of Essential Services Reform. Sir, nothing is more important in this game than reform. And you're talking about essential services. Let me tell you, the way we do things is what we need to change. The way we are structured to do things, we need to change. But enough of that. And let me say, Ajay, the microphone is yours.
Thank you so much, Manjeev. Professor Takeuchi, Ramesh, Fabby, Vibha, my dear friend Manjeev, and the many, many friends of many years as well as new friends in the audience. It's a delight to be with you. I'd like you to place yourself in the shoes of a person, say in Togo or Chad or Burkina Faso. When Jim Skia talks of the future, depending on solar, what will it take for that person in Chad or Burkina Faso or Togo to get energy from solar? Let's ask this question. I use these countries as examples because I have had the opportunity to stand as this question was asked to people from these countries. It was answered in many languages, many of which unfortunately I don't understand well enough. But there were 3 or 4 things that were said. The first is, where is the technology? The second thing which was said was, right, but who will do it? And he looked around at the people around him and said, none of us even know anything about it. The third issue that was identified by people everywhere, but they were not part of the users, but some of the more enterprising people we met, the question was, where will we get the money for this? And the fourth question that was very often asked, everybody is used to a utility-based model of electrification. And they ask, will the utility allow us to do solar, for example, on our roofs, or solar pumps in our farms, etc.? Well, solar pumps they didn't say, because most of these countries have diesel pumps, agricultural pumps. This, therefore, set us thinking. And what I'd like to do is to share the thoughts of the International Solar Alliance on each of these and what is it that we are doing to address them. The first question is technologies. There is no doubt that if, for example, you want to set up a solar cold storage in a lesser developed country, the kinds of models that the person will use will be those which work under any circumstances, robust models. So we set around looking for a robust model. It almost needed development, it needed tweaking. I'm glad to say that we finally have one in which solar electricity is used to power a very energy efficient but a standard technology used for providing cooling. But the interesting thing is that while it provides cooling during the day, it also chills water, which is used at night. So initially the cost that you had on batteries and the maintenance cost you had on batteries disappears, because now the chilled water provides the cool during the night. The short point is we have had to focus on technology development, and then you have only one or two companies doing this, and therefore you need to introduce them to the people on the other side. This is the first challenge. The second is monies. How will you get the monies? Many years ago, well, not that many years ago, 4 years ago, the International Solar Alliance thought that we probably needed to create a global solar bank. But as we talked to more and more financial institutions, we realized that there was enough money out there. Ramesh is here from the, I can call you Ramesh, can't I?
Of course.
Ramesh is here from the Asian Development Bank. The Asian Development Bank has made huge pledges of the amount of money it already invests in renewables, including solar, and that it will do even more. All over the world, we found that the amount of monies available today for investment in renewables crosses $1 trillion. What is put in is something of the order of $750, $800 million. So there is enough money. But the problem is that 74% of the money that was invested has gone to the OECD countries and China. So we asked investors, why aren't you investing, for example, in Africa where the solar insolation is great, where the need is great? And the answer we got is, we are not sure whether we will get returns on our investment. The second thing was, where is the project pipeline? Consequently, we took it as a challenge and have therefore created the Global Solar Facility, which provides guarantees for decentralized solar. It's not for large solar. But if you want to go into decentralized solar, you can buy a guarantee from the Solar Alliance. And if you are not paid, you would be paid by the guarantee. Why were we confident? Because of the existing solar loans in Africa, less than 2% have defaulted. 2% is a magic number, because that's the average defaults in loans across the world, for all sectors. And solar is less than that in Africa. But people are looking at a rate of return of 19 to 20% on equity for investments in Africa. Yes, there is a problem of foreign exchange hedging. Yes, of course there is. That's 4%, 5%. Why is this 19%? If it could be 7%, 8%, that's understandable. The rest is, in a sense, the premium on what the investors see as risk. And the guarantee, we hope, will provide comfort for investors to come. But on the other side, who will do the projects? We have therefore started identifying where is it that there are startups on solar. So last year, or earlier this year, we looked at Africa. We asked startups to apply, 182 startups applied, 20 have been selected who are going through crash courses, boot camps we call them, on raising money, on technological partnerships, and on brand building. We would like that some of these 20 become the Amazons of tomorrow, providing solar goods and services in Africa. These provision of money on the one side and the take-up of money on the other side is the only way it will make a difference. In the year 2024, we will do a similar program for Asia and the Pacific. And in 2025, we'll do a similar program for Latin America, and then come back to Africa. The short point that I want to leave with you with is that we need to jumpstart We need to prime the pump. I don't know what other phrases I can use to help this happen. It will not happen by itself. The last point I want to make is capacity. You need people. You need institutions. You need people, you need trained people. I have a solar pump on my farm, which is approximately 500 kilometers from Delhi, approximately 50 kilometers from a town called Lucknow. But if I need any expertise in repairing it, I need to bring somebody from Lucknow. That is tough. It's expensive. We need to create this capacity at the level of villages. At the Solar Alliance, therefore, we help make that happen. We provide certified training so that that person can be employed by projects on the one hand and has a degree of comfort that he would be employed. Timing is important in this. You can't have too much of a time difference between the time when you train the person and when the person is employed on the basis of that certification. We believe that interventions at the grassroots level are required in order for change to happen. For those villagers in Burkina Faso or Chad or Togo that I talked about to take up solar. Solar has the potential to change the global market, but it needs our help. I thank you for your attention.
Ajay, thank you very much, and all powers to your elbows as you steer the International Solar Alliance. I think there's absolutely no doubt that the issues that you highlighted, and particularly capacity, are perhaps the most critical. I'm glad that you're also looking in terms of money, but the very idea that, it's not just that the sun is out there, but the sun can help generate electricity directly and help you power yourself to a better life. That's yeoman's work done by the International Solar Alliance. Let me turn to my left. Ramesh, can I go beyond you to the extreme corner and turn to Fabby Tumiwa? We want to hear from you.
Thank you.
I'll tell you the reasons for that. Among the reasons are, we want to hear from you, what do you want to say to us in terms of reforms? What is it that you want us to do? It's all very well to talk about a behavioral change and understanding. The problem has been stated again and again. I don't think people don't know the problem. If today they don't tackle the problem, is because they don't want to tackle the problem. The second thing is, the institutions, perhaps more than the people, are more inflexible. So what is it that you have on the table for us? And frankly, if you have the magic wand, will we all not be grateful? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I hope I can answer your questions in my speech reflecting Indonesia's situations. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, and thank you for inviting me to this event. And it's very honor for me to speak in here. The Indonesia government has set the goal of becoming net zero by 2060 or sooner, or earlier than 2060. And by 2050, actually, the government aspires to have achieved a net zero emission in the power sectors. Last year, Just Energy Transition Partnership, or GETP, a deal was made between Indonesia and G7 plus countries. And the Comprehensive Investment Policy Plan, or CIPP, is launched just before COP28. That was last year. IESR has been involved in the development of the CIPP as a member of technical working group that looking at pathways to achieve the JETP target. GETP aims to accelerate power sector transitions to reach emission peak by 2030 and rapidly deploy renewable energy to reach 44% of energy mix by 2030. With all its limitation, it is an encouraging beginning. However, the target, we know, still falls short of meeting Paris Agreement goal. But furthermore, in addition to this JETP, there are three more essential components that Indonesia must have in order to achieve net zero goal by 2060 or sooner. First, that as Indonesia has abundant renewable energy resources that could be better utilized with the right technology. Renewable energy resources in Indonesia is quite abundant. The government estimates that there is around 3,700 gigawatt of potential for renewable energy sources, which is solar is the largest. And we also have wind, hydro, geothermal, biomass, and ocean energy. We have everything. There are like 3,300 gigawatt estimated of solar power, and making that the biggest resource available. Even our own assessment show that is actually triple than this number, that official figures. So I can say that there is enough renewable energy in our system to reach net zero emission by 2060. In addition to renewable energy technology, we also need energy efficient technology for industry and manufacturing. You mentioned about the processing of mineral resources. We also need that to make that this mineral resources more low carbons. We also need electric transmission technology, high voltage direct current, high voltage alternating current, HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, smart grid, energy storage, intelligent control system, electrolyzers, and for green energy, green hydrogen productions. So that's the first ingredient. We need clean energy technology. Second, we need investment, because investment capital at a reasonable cost is required. Without funding, the energy transition cannot take place. In order to gradually phase out polluting and inefficient coal plants, Indonesia must implement large-scale renewable energy deployment. And if it wants to achieve net zero energy by 2060, so we have to really accelerate this deployment. Some studies have estimated that investment ranging from around $1 trillion USD to $1.4 trillion is necessary until 2050 or 2060. Translated into like average between 30 to $45 billion annual investment in this clean technology. If you look at the Just Energy Transition Partnership, the estimate for the investment $97 billion will be necessary to help power sector reach its peak emission by 2030. To ensure that our developing economy remain competitive and that low-income people can afford clean energy services, Indonesia need both substantial investment and affordable financings. Not just investment money, but also affordable financing, concessional finance. The third, employment and increased ownership and strengthen local economy should all result from the energy transition. The government of Indonesia takes a regulation of local content very seriously. Therefore, enhancing research and development technology, building a domestic manufacturing capability, and creating a supply chain for clean energy are all necessary. The sensible course of action would be that Indonesia forge partnership with other nations and renewable energy producers. One is like with India, for instance, that's the opportunity, all while creating a climate that is conducive to investment in clean energy technology. We understand that the energy transition causes a significant in social and economic effects as a nation moves away from fossil fuel, and especially as we move away from coal. 3 to 4% of Indonesia gross domestic product is derived from coal industries. It may not seem like much, but it accounts for 10% to 40% of the total if you look at the revenue to the coal producing region in Indonesia. So we expect that because of energy transition, the domestic coal demand will begin to fall after reaching a peak in 2030 as the transition gains momentum. Consequently, with the millions of direct and indirect jobs associated with this industry, the decline of coal industry could impact the life of those people. The loss of government revenue could put a strain on the budget of several subnational governments in Indonesia context, jeopardize economic growth in the area, and make it harder to achieve the sustainable development goals. So the just transition is about survival of this region and communities, and we have to uphold to this. They require immediate support because their current choices are limited. In the event that knowledge and experience are scarce, we must determine how to expedite assistance to this area and its community so they can prepare for and carry out a just transition more quickly. And in order to better prepare and execute the Just Transition Program, which is in the line with SDG target, and assist government, region, and communities in dealing with the socio-economic impact of the coal phase-out, and to ensure social protection in place, we should consider mobilizing international collaborations. And my proposal is that I would like to share with you is that we are working to establish a Just Transition Facility to provide rapid technical assistance support and finance to support community and local government with the greatest impact due to energy transition. I believe that there is greatly need for this kind of assistance, especially in the coal-producing countries and region in Indonesia, India, and elsewhere. And this facility could assist economic diversification, planning, green jobs, and directly support impacted communities to survive when these impacts start to come. In addition to identifying funding sources, we must consider ways to mobilize expertise at a global scale to support this facility. So let us work together and make rapid energy transition happen in just, fair, and equitable way. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. You know, many of you perhaps are not aware, but at least in my lifetime, Indonesia was a major oil producer, a major fossil fuel producer. And if this country is also the fourth largest country in the world, one of the largest countries in the world, makes this transition towards renewables using the natural resources which are available aplenty, as they've mentioned to you, it's not just JETP. It's exactly what you said your theme stands for, reform. It's thinking the ways of doing things. But I want to draw your attention to something very else, very important in the context of just, which was mentioned, which was the equity in social transition. It's not just money and that I'm available, but do I feel good? Am I included? Am I part of the inclusion, which is particularly important? So it's not that, you know, I get the money and I do it, but I really have to have that particular feeling. Very important, sir. Excellent. You were before us in the G20 and leading this charge, and it was particularly important that I'm glad that we've been able to carry forward the agenda of sustainability, the entire agenda of transition in energy, but a just and equitable one at our times, and I hope the Brazilians will take this forward. Ramesh, Mr. Subramaniam, Director General ADB. At the end of the whole thing, it's all about money. You have to run. No, that's fine. Everybody has to run, and that's very important, but we'll hold them, their feet to the fire some other way. Mr. Subramaniam, money makes the world go round. Whether we like it or not, and Ajay Mathur said you've got oodles of money around. I don't know about that. But you know, the microphone is now yours, and he's escaped having to answer the question as to where the money is lying. There you are.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Puri, Dr. Dhawan, and particularly Shailly. Thank you so much. Dr. Mathur, I'll pick up some of the questions that you raised, but we'll share with you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I have a set of slides post-lunch. You may be kind of in a sleepy mode, so I wanted you to see some numbers. But first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity, and also to TERI and CICERO, because working with knowledge partners who are coming up with solutions is very, very critical, and fantastic to have Takeuchi on here as well. I'll talk about the challenges that we face as well as, but you know, these are not really challenges, these are opportunities that we have as well. As I speak, I'll be rolling some of the slides. The we've been saying for the past few years at the ADB that the battle against climate change will be won or lost in the Asia and the Pacific. But at the same time, this battle is being fought actually quite well globally, as well as closer to home for those of us who are coming from Asia and the Pacific region. The good news is that the renewable energy capacity has been growing significantly, and in fact on all fronts as you see on this graph, including in some of the what we may call as the battlefronts against climate change. And here the ambition of, for instance, China, the country where Fabby comes from in Indonesia, and India, where TERI is located. For example, the ambitious targets of India to reach its renewable energy targets of 2030, even in 2022, is quite remarkable. And as Ambassador Puri mentioned, what Indonesia has done, despite all the challenges, is also quite noteworthy. Now, at the same time, there are certainly challenges that we face. Now, in the context of money, as Dr. Mathur was talking about, money is definitely needed. Getting money, and particularly in terms of the right type of money to come after right projects, is always challenging because investors do look for returns. But what we see at the ADB particularly worrisome, I don't know how many of you have been tracking financial flows globally. If you value all the assets that are out there in the world, including immovable assets, we've got close to $1,500 trillion of money available if you monetize. But even if you do not monetize, there is close to about at least $900 trillion of financial assets that are available. But if you look at the screen in terms of what is needed to meet the Sustainable Development Goals globally, what we need is only about $6-7 trillion. And within that, if you look at SDG 7, that amount goes down even further. And if you zoom in further into Asia and the Pacific or into Africa, those amounts are affordable. We will be able to get them, or we should be able to get them. But why is that not happening? So that is a challenge that we all face. And if you look at the bottom of the table, in terms of the resources committed and the shares that we have and the funds that are coming in, at this rate, if we do not mobilize significantly larger resources, we will not be meeting the Sustainable Development Goals even by 2065. So business as usual scenario is not going to work. So what is it that we can do? Now, if you look at, but at the same time, and here this is another way of looking at what are the needs. Globally, in the emerging markets and developing economies, the needs are huge, right? The billions of dollars. And then if you look at China, India, Southeast Asia, and then you have other parts of the world, these needs are quite significant. And some of these needs could be easily met, but others, as you saw in the previous slide, we do need to make sure that money goes into the marginally or unbankable space. Now, very fortunately, as Ambassador Puri mentioned and what Dr. Mathur mentioned, in renewable space, we've been making enormous progress. If you think back where we were 10 years ago, would we have imagined that we would be making the progress that we have made? The answer is no. But I think clearly, based on what we've done, how can we ensure that the money goes to these unbankable areas is going to be quite critical. Now, a specific aspect of this is that clearly if you look at this screen, the bar charts they present you with data in terms of how the funding that has been going in is spliced into different forms coming from different sources. Of course, the public resources are going to be quite critical. In most countries, public sector spending has been the dominant force. Private sector needs to come in, but bankability challenges are there. But a call on institutions like ADB, particularly now in the G20 context, India has just transitioned its G20 presidency to Brazil yesterday as we speak. But the phenomenal leadership of India, the triple agenda that the government of India, the Indian G20 presidency has posed on the global financial community is very, very critical, and we are taking that very seriously. And now that particular challenge is how do we ensure that we leverage, because an institution like ADB has been quite significant, we are putting in serious money, but that's not enough if you look at the challenges. So can we do a much better job than what we are doing in leveraging much more private capital to come in and to address the bankability challenges that we face is what you see. Now, in this context, I'm very happy to share with you that looking at it from ADB perspective, but I think you can say this about some of the other multilateral institutions also. If you are looking at Inter-American Development Bank in Latin America, or African Development Bank, of course, the World Bank globally speaking, we are all responding to these calls, but I'm actually very pleased, speaking for ADB, that we are the first multilateral institution to heed to the calls of the G20 leaders, and we've gone through our board, our shareholders approved the capital adequacy framework update. What that means is, by reinterpreting the headroom that we have, we will have now, literally starting from January, 40% more capacity. And that is a combination of highly concessional resources as well as market-based resources which we can use for private sector commitments. And this is a fairly significant $36 billion of resources that are available, and we've always been traditionally leveraging significantly more from the private sector. Now, in parallel, we've also reformed our internal organization structure to respond to what we see as 4 critical shifts in the region. The first is climate shift, that is existential threat for all of us. Second is private sector mobilization. As you saw in the previous one of the previous slides, how do we make sure that the vast financing needs, and particularly what is it that the global private financial sector can do to meet these bankability challenges, is going to be very, very critical. So that is the private sector mobilization part. The third is what Dr. Mathur talked about in terms of the technology solutions, the new technologies that are emerging. We do need to make sure that the developing countries have adequate capacity, both in the public sector as well as private sector, that we call as a solutions challenge. And then finally, none of this can be met by any one country or any one institution alone. And here I wanted to pick up what Ambassador Puri mentioned. Is it people's mindset or is it institutional change that we need to bring about? It's a combination of both. So what that means is that 4th challenge, which is the partnership challenge that we need to make. And here on the transition finance, we are quite happy, and I'm particularly Fabby here. Indonesia has been a pioneer. I just wanted to, what you see on the screen is how have we put transition finance into full mode. Here there is a lot of software that is needed. Reforms are going to be very, very critical. We have what we call as a 4P framework when it comes to energy transition. The first P is what needs to be done within the power system. The second P is quite critical as well. That is the policy space, because business as usual is not going to work. If you are talking about coal retirement, for instance, it's no use to close one coal plant for another coal plant to come up. And the third P, which is the partnership dimension that I talked about, and the 4th P is probably the most important, that is the people dimension, because the people are the ones who are affected, whether it's labor that is working in these transition sectors or the people who will be affected. So the ETM, the energy transition mechanism that you see on the right side, the lower box, is a pretty innovative mechanism to identify coal assets that can be retired early. So it's called accelerated coal retirement. Obviously that needs money, because investors have put in significant amounts of money, although it is probably, one may say now looking back with hindsight, it's polluting money, but nonetheless investors do need the returns. How do you make sure that those returns are met in a net present value context? And that needs a lot of concessional funding. And today morning we signed with the Monetary Authority of Singapore a landmark $2 billion memorandum of understanding to utilize significant chunks of concessional money. And we also have other partners, including Japan, Germany, New Zealand, and so on, that have contributed. Now here, I think Ambassador Puri, you talked about the critical minerals and the supply chains. That is very, very critical. We do need to look at what is happening, what are the industry capabilities in the developing countries, regardless of which part of the world we are looking at. And the value chain is going to be very, very critical that we need to look at. And this is a totally new area for many of the institutions. But we are looking at how can we scale up investments in the space. And then finally, my last focus is going to be how do we, I think this is Ambassador, you picked up very nicely, how do we make sure that this massive transition that we are talking about is just, equitable, affordable, and fair. Now here we are very happy to share with you that we've launched a Just Transition Partnership, which brings in the people dimensions. And what you see here is the focus on all these areas in terms of leveraging our expertise, collaborative and participatory approaches, and inclusivity is going to be very, very critical. Otherwise, you will create more losers in the transition process. So this is what we are focusing on. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director General. That was really excellent. There is money, there is capacity building available, and there is a will on the part of perhaps one of the more important regional development banks in the world to do something. You know, Shailly, with your permission, if somebody has a question, and as you can see, one of our panelists has had to go, but if any of you have a question, please raise it at this time. We'll try and squeeze 5 minutes out of the later question hour for that purpose. So if there's a question, please go ahead. Everybody's understood everything.
Absolutely.
Everyone is in agreement. Or no one has any questions?
Too much to absorb.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ramesh, thank you very much, Fanny. You guys were absolutely sterling, wonderful. Most grateful to you and your institution.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Dhawan, thank you. So could we request the participants in the next session, the technical segment as it's called, Shailly Kedia, Dr. Aamodt, Bhavya, and Kate Logan. You know, first of all, again, welcome you all on behalf of TERI as well as the TERI School of Advanced Studies. We have Professor Gopal Sarangi from them also joining me here on the panel. Shailly, it's for you to go first. Please make your presentation. We give people 6 to 8 minutes, but try and really be within the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Master Puri. I'll be brief with my presentation. This presentation is on broad findings of our Act for Earth initiative. It is a knowledge initiative that was launched at the 21st edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit, and which has 2 components called COP Compass and SDG Charter. The larger objective being strengthening the interface between SDGs and climate action. So coming to COP28 Compass on Road to Dubai and the Global Goal on Adaptation. And this is so as a part of this initiative, we came out with 4 sets of policy brief. So with respect to this, we feel that the outcome on GGA will be a key determinant of the success of COP, and the fact that it has to be rooted in CBDRRC, linked to NCQG, not just GST, and also a strong mention and action points and means of implementation. And with the latest negotiating text, all these aspects do remain still in bracketed. But more than that, the very paradigm needs to shift when we look at adaptation. IPCC definition clearly emphasizes that adaptation has to be seen from the lens of human and natural systems and not countries. So a paradigm shift is needed in the climate regime with respect to adaptation to not just look at countries. So in other words, there is a need to revisit the problem statement. When it comes to just energy transitions, this was the other policy brief. We feel that just energy transitions, of course, is a minilateral initiative. And it needs to follow a more holistic approach that aligns with existing multilateral climate finance mechanisms. And also, more importantly, it should not add to the debt burden of developing countries. At this stage, we also find that existing JETPs, some of the plans that we've seen, suffer from the lack of connection between energy demand and energy supply. And when we talk about energy transitions and energy systems, both supply and demand side interventions are absolutely key. Another gap area is that there is an insufficient focus on R&D and developing breakthrough technologies, and there isn't enough investment going through R&D to develop those clean technologies that will indeed ensure just energy transitions. And not just that, as a point which was highlighted, that it needs to be accessible and affordable as well. Coming to SDG Charter, one of the policy brief focused on internationalizing lifestyle for sustainable development. And many of you following the G20 discourse know that this was one of the major outcomes of the G20 declaration under India's G20 presidency. And it came out with the G20 high-level principles on lifestyles for sustainable development. Already under the SDGs, Goal 12 has 11 indicators, but none of them really focus on downstream indicators except education. It doesn't even focus on consumer data, doesn't have aspects of eco-labels or labeling information instruments. So that aspect can be strengthened. In the policy brief, we also analyzed UN General Assembly resolution. There were 3 resolutions on sustainable consumption, but none of them focused on individual behavior change. So that too is something which India can use as a platform to further internationalize lifestyle for environment. The other avenue to internationalize lifestyle for sustainable development and the G20 high-level principles is the UNFCCC process itself. I mean, many new agenda items have been introduced, including food security and agriculture, just transitions, citing and taking like the support of Article 2 of UNFCCC as well as the Paris Agreement. So also lifestyle can be further internationalized by that, but important to also look at adaptation and lifestyle and not just look at the very, very global North conception of lifestyle, which is largely focused on mitigation. So the final policy brief is on green budgeting, and this is one of the concrete policy innovation tools in which TERI is not just working at a conceptual level, but on the actual implementation level with state governments in India. And one of the rationale for green budgeting is that what we see is the local standi of environment ministries and departments is limited when it actually comes to implementation. Implementation mandates lie with many line departments, lie with subnational entities in India, for example, at the states, union territory levels, and even with cities and other local governments. So it is essential that environment and climate is mainstreamed across departments and sectors, both horizontally as well as vertically. And in India, we worked with the state of Bihar, and what we see is that over the 4 years, the budget line items which integrate climate sensitive aspects or green aspects have tripled in just last 4 years. So we see that more number of schemes are integrating these aspects. Similarly, in case of Puducherry, which is like the first federal unit to not just table the green budget in its legislative assembly, but in the budget session of the legislative assembly. So with respect to that, they increased their green budget allocation by 153%. And we feel that green budget is a powerful self-assessment tool, not just for public finance allocation, but to identify gaps and leverage on other finance instruments more effectively. And that's the last slide. I would just say that these are the QR codes from where you can scan and download. Some copies we have, and we will be kind of, you can come and collect it from me after the event. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shailly. You've highlighted here several interesting aspects of practical experience of dealing with governments in large countries, India. But at this global venue, as we are putting this across, I think the most important point that you made was internalize environment and climate and make it part of the way you really do things and think about it. We are very fortunate. We have our following Shailly, Dr. Solveig Aamodt, who's from CICERO, Norway, a country which in some senses has everything. Money, hydrocarbons, now all kinds of geothermal, so many other different forms of energy which are coming up in the world, and plus perhaps a wonderful, equitable society. Many things, but above all, they also have tremendous experience and willingness to share in capacity building worldwide. So we're very happy to have you participate in this and hear from you what might be ideas which are perhaps India relevant but perhaps greatly relevant in large parts of the world, which we too could, dip into. So the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Puri. I'm not here to defend Norway, so I'll leave that for someone else. The part of the presentation that I will make is from a project that we have that's called In Green. It's on India, so it's on India's ambitions and possibilities of becoming a global green leader, but it's funded from Norway, so it's a cooperation between CICERO and TERI School of Advanced Studies in Delhi. And because of India's size and importance on the global transition, the Norwegian government is very interested in knowing more. So that's why we got the funding. So it's to understand, and also to understand how countries can cooperate to advance a green agenda. So in the project we have a multi-level perspective, international, that I will talk more about, and then we have national and local focus as well, that Bhavya will bring in, and we have two main research areas. It's the international ambitions and roles, and then there's the trade-offs and synergies between SDGs in India specifically. So what happened internationally, especially after Paris, is that we got a more polycentric system. So a lot of things happen outside of the COPs and between the COPs, and also outside of the negotiations. So all of you that have, of course, been running around here for this week and for the next week know that there's so much going on that's not really officially COP agenda. So we have minilateralism and climate clubs. That was the call from the people that did the research on the COPs. They were saying that this multilateral, that all the countries together, is not going to solve it. We have to have things in addition. We have to have the ambitious countries moving forward. So those are the minilateralism. I don't know if it's really a word, but it's becoming a word now. And you have sector-specific initiatives, like the Solar Alliance, you have the JACPs, and you have new multilateral initiatives. Also, the ISA is an example of that. And are there possibilities to bypass the sort of trust challenges we have still between the global north and the global south at COP and in the UNFCCC? And we're also looking at if there's a possibility for new learning and new leadership, if we have more cooperation sort of behind the scenes of COP and across sectors. So the Just Energy Transition Partnership, Shailly already mentioned it. So this is a funding mechanism from the G7 and Friends. So the Friends would be typically Norway and other Nordic countries, countries that have the funds and have the interest in contributing with funding, but also sort of needs something to show for the lack of attention to these issues at home. So the focus is on coal-dependent countries. The first one was a partnership with South Africa, but there's also a partnership with Indonesia and Vietnam now that we also heard some about. India is more reluctant, and this has to do with this being an initiative where much of the conditions are set by the donor countries. So it's a lot of this is on loans, and a lot of it is on hiding the main interests of the G7 and Friends countries, and why is this funding mainly for coal? Why is there not a larger focus on fossil fuels that we, speaking as a Norwegian, need to do something about at home, but we're not able to? But there is also a focus on social aspects that's important, but from research we know that may not be at the top of the agenda when it comes down to discussing technical and economical specifics. So it remains to be seen how that's really integrated. The International Solar Alliance that we also heard about, it's one of the few of these this new climate clubs, and it's becoming a multilateral now, of course, with so many member countries. That's led from the global south. So, and we've heard about the different programs that they have for developing countries, especially focused on Africa. So what we're trying to look at is if this can be the missing link to create the trust between the donors and the countries that need these investments, because there's a lack of trust. Part of the donors that we heard about is there's a higher risk perceived in investing, especially in African countries, but also a lack of trust, rightfully so, on behalf of the countries receiving the investment. What's really behind this? What's really the intention of investing in our country? So maybe the ISA can play an important role in creating these new corporations. On the part of India, the way we see it is that the ISA is also a more flexible role for India outside of the UNFCCC, because India has become more and more the voice of the global south, and India has the size of being the voice of the global south in a way that's different from, for instance, China's possibility to be that voice, and it's also very different from the smaller developing countries that feel they have more to risk voicing critical issues of inequality in events like, or in negotiations like the COP. So maybe it's a new possibility for India to take leadership. It's still in the initial years of the ISA, but we hope to follow it and see how that goes. That's what I plan to say. Thank you.
Solveig, thank you very much. I think that was very good, useful, and it's good to get a perspective. You stressed a little bit on JETP. We heard that from our Indonesian colleague. The conditions and the circumstances of India are a little bit different. And therefore, one size fits all is not necessary, not at least for by far the largest country in the world, and I know how big Indonesia is. And given what is happening in India, the last 1 year, we've seen the sort of burgeoning electricity demand can't be met by anything else but coal. And for all the rest of the conversations that we talk about, the reality is that today, even in the developed world, it really is coal, and other than that being the other fossil fuel. But that being so as it is, Bhavya, may I give you the floor, and let's hear your presentation.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bhavya. I'm a PhD scholar at TERI School of Advanced Studies. And today I'll be talking about enabling SDG-centric just energy transition in India. So sort of taking the just transition discourse to the local level and how we can enable a just transition at a micro level. So I also work on the InGreen project. So Surya has already mentioned that. It's the overarching aim is to understand India's ambitions and possibilities of becoming a global green leader. And there are two main research areas. First is India's roles and ambitions in India's climate governance, and second is to understand the linkages, the synergies and trade-offs of energy transition in India with SDGs, which is the focus of my research. So just to give a little bit of background and sort of reiterate again why it is important to integrate SDGs into energy transition is because most countries have dual objectives to undergo decarbonization, but at the same time they have to tackle energy poverty and other developmental challenges. So clean energy transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. But so just another point first is that still climate agenda and development agenda is sort of seen as separate and implemented parallelly despite their many interlinkages. To sort of to fulfill both of the goals, it's important to integrate them and integrate these linkages. So clean energy transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy can act as a link between these two agendas because it is not only crucial for decarbonization, but it is also rooted in the SDGs, most explicitly as Goal 7. However, it's also important to understand, and I think it's well established, that this transition is not just technological. It has important economic, social, and political implications, which are again aligned with the different SDGs. So that's why it's important to sort of shift our focus from just a mere energy transition to a just energy transition that should ideally enhance the synergies and minimize trade-offs. But for that, it's also important to sort of expand our interpretation of just transition. So the just transition discourse mostly focuses on macro level and safeguarding the jobs in the coal sector, which is of course important, but it's also important to expand our interpretation and to also integrate SDGs into the just transition discourse, which is currently limited. So if I talk about India, India is a very important country. It has a unique position. On one hand, it has ambitious renewable expansion targets. It's already undergoing energy transition, but it has to undergo this transition amidst the various income and gender inequalities that exist. It has to tackle the problem of energy poverty and energy access, especially to the poor. That's why just transition acts as a very important opportunity for India to integrate and fulfill both of these goals. But again, for that it's important to view the energy transition from a holistic lens, from a justice and sustainability lens. So my argument in my research is that inequality acts as a very important and interesting focal point to do exactly just that, because reducing inequality is a significant component of both justice and sustainability. It is not only just explicitly present as goal 10, but it has alignment with almost all of the SDG goals and targets. Therefore, it becomes very important to understand the inequality implications of solar energy expansion, which are currently understudied. And this inequality lens can sort of help in integrating the two agendas, not only at the macro level, but at the ground level. So we also have some empirical findings cited in the literature and some preliminary findings from the field, and I'll be collecting more data. But if I talk about the utility scale solar projects like solar parks, land plays an important role, and acquiring that land can have important inequality implications. It can reproduce the existing inequalities of land ownership. It can exclude the already marginalized from the benefits. There will be loss of traditional livelihood. There will be generation of new employment, but this will be limited, and this will mainly be in the construction phase of the solar park, and these opportunities cannot be accessed equally or equitably by women, thereby excluding them from this transition. There are also cases cited in the literature where the community dialogues were impacted by the existing power relations, and they were more influenced by the large-scale farmers and the more influential and educated, excluding there's a lack of representation of marginalized. Similarly, for decentralized solar projects also, most schemes target landowners, thereby excluding the non-landowners, and it can reproduce the existing inequalities. The employment or the opportunities that are generated by the increase of energy are also impact the different social groups differently. Owing to the societal norms or the traditional responsibilities, women cannot access these opportunities as their male counterparts. So we're also trying to develop a just transition inequality SDG framework, sort of taking SDG 10 as an entry point and the first 4 SDG targets, because they are most crucial for solar energy transition at local level, and then seeing its alignment with the different SDGs. So I'll just close with these key messages and arguments that just transition in India can act as a very important opportunity to fulfill its climate and development goals. But for that, the understanding of just transition needs to be expanded, and it needs to be looked at from a more holistic perspective to integrate the SDGs into the discourse. And for that, it becomes crucial to understand the inequality implications and the structural inequalities that already exist. And just to close with the final argument is that just transition should ideally enhance the capability of all, and it should increase income, it should be inclusive, and it should create equal opportunities. Thank you.
Bhavya, thank you very much. Now, I was very struck by what you said and a kind of central point of what you said. For you, the S in Sustainable Development Goals has a huge component of an S that we don't talk about, which is the social inclusion element. Now, you know, India has been at the forefront of pushing something else, aligned but something else, the idea of life, which started off as lifestyles for environment and sustainable development, announced by the Prime Minister at Glasgow, but taking on through the G20 processes into the concepts of the life economy. And therefore, the issue that sustainable development goals is about the environment and the linkage of environment, climate with development and ensuring there's holisticness includes and must include the issue of the social element for it. And so thank you very much for stressing it. If you noticed, our colleagues in Indonesia are particularly mindful of that. And their JETP transition, the entire set of issues that they are doing are taking that into account. I am very grateful and very happy that you're stressing this. So Kate, let's turn to you. Let's try and have, I don't know if you work in India or you don't, but I can tell you the Asia Society Policy Institute certainly works in India and does a lot of work in India trying to steer India's politics, international politics in various ways. Good or not, that's a different matter. But we want to hear from you. And I'll tell you why I want to hear from you in particular. I want to hear from you the views from the perspective of the world's largest economy and its institution, which is focused on my part of the world, Asia, India, etc. Because frankly, sitting at this COP, we are talking in terms of international cooperation, not what you do yourself and ideas that you may have yourself. Your understanding is valuable for us itself, but whatever it may be, whether it's focused on India or anything, it will be a good takeaway as far as we are concerned. The microphone is yours.
Thanks so much, Ambassador. And I can't speak to the broader politics, but I can certainly speak to our work on climate. So my presentation has two parts. The first part will be sharing some of the findings of research put out by our High-Level Policy Commission on getting Asia to net zero, which actually visited India in August 2022 to release a report specifically on India. I'll be sharing some findings of the report focusing on the Asia-Pacific region more broadly, sort of underpinning the necessity of the just transition in the region. And then I'll share two case studies of initiatives that ASPI is working on in order to help address some of the challenges having to do with the just transition. So just quickly before I start, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Asia Society Policy Institute, we are the think tank affiliated with the Asia Society. So Asia Society was founded in the 1950s, is headquartered in New York, focused on building bridges between Asia and the West. The Policy Institute focuses on three areas, of which one is climate and energy. Was formerly headed up by the former Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd. He's now left us to become the Australian ambassador to the US, but we are continuing our good work in the meantime. So in May of 2022, ASPI set up and launched this high-level policy commission on getting Asia to net zero, with the idea that there's a lack of research sort of underpinning some of the linkages between Asia's net zero transition and some of the social and economic implications of that transition. So since then, the Commission has put out a series of reports. I'd like to first share some of the findings of one of those reports released earlier this year, looking at different pathways to net zero within the Asia-Pacific region. The first key point is that taking more ambitious climate action and reducing emissions sooner could actually enhance the Asia-Pacific's economic and social development. So here you can see some of the findings in terms of the impact on GDP above projected baseline GDP. The green line is a net zero 2050 pathway. You can see that the boost in GDP peaks as high as 6.3% above projected baseline GDP. But even under a current policy scenario, which is the blue and pink lines as well, you can see that there's still as much as a 5% boost to GDP above projected baseline levels. So the key point being that overall, the net zero transition can be an enhancement for economic development. But of course, there are challenges as well, and this is where the importance of the just transition comes in. So first, we've talked a lot about finance today. The findings of the study also put some figures to the finance that may be needed for the Asia-Pacific region. So under a current policy scenario, it's projected that the region will need around 55 trillion for that transition. But in order to get to net zero by mid-century, which is in line with the 1.5 degree pathway, that figure could be as high as above 70 trillion. And the main drivers for this investment are power sector in the short and medium term, and then in the longer term, investment in energy efficiency. But the key point is that a lot of the investment, specifically in the power sector, will need to be front-loaded. So it's really important, especially in terms of international support for the transition, to figure out how to make that finance flow faster, and also to address some of the issues in terms of concessional finance as well. And then in addition to that, the good news from an employment perspective is that the modeling finds that there will be an overall net increase in jobs, as many as 36.5 million new jobs at peak impact. But again, that transition is not even, so there will be significant jobs lost within fossil fuel sectors. And again, you can see some of the statistics behind me, but even under the current policy pathway, there will be as many as 25 million additional jobs above baseline rated. So just quickly, I want to share 2 examples of more practical initiatives that ASPE is working on in order to address some of the findings of the research that I just shared. The first comes from an initiative that we launched about a year ago focused on looking at how China can help to address some of Southeast Asia's clean energy transition and help to accelerate the transition, including around ensuring a just transition. So this was a series of dialogues bringing together stakeholders from China and 5 different countries in Southeast Asia, which are Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines. And these dialogues were aimed at addressing some of the barriers to investment, but then also identifying a more active role in how China could help to facilitate a just transition within the region. So one of the key policy recommendations that's quite interesting that has come out of this initiative is the idea of something called a climate prosperity zone, which could help to build a bottom-up just transition, not only in Southeast Asia. This is also a model that could be applicable more broadly. So these are essentially an integrated project-oriented solution for rebuilding the national economy around clean energy technologies and supply chains, while also attaining climate benefits. So part of the idea is that you're not just investing in deployment, but also investing in manufacturing capacity, which will create economic drivers of growth from the clean economy at the same time. So an example of what this would look like in practice is, for instance, in Indonesia, where there are significant investments in off-grid industrial capacity powered by off-grid coal-fired power plants at present. There could be manufacturing as well as deployment for clean energy and battery storage, all co-located in the same region on a bottom-up model. So sort of circumvent some of the challenges in terms of having to integrate energy into the grid, while also creating more support for the just transition and clean energy on a local level, which can help to address some of the political economy challenges. So the model would progressively deploy co-located renewables and storage, create the manufacturing capacity as mentioned, eventually could also generate carbon credits for avoided emissions, and then also in terms of being something that's bottom up, it could create more immediate impacts as some of the broader reforms take place over time and are perhaps more slower to take up. So this is one example of an idea that could be applied in order to build that political support for a just transition toward clean energy. The second example may answer your question about some of the work that we're doing in India.
Yep.
So this is a new initiative that we're in the process of launching that will look at how India's announced carbon credit trading scheme could be structured to ensure that some of the revenues can be applied and repurposed for a just transition. So for those of you who are familiar with carbon trading, some of the challenges of carbon trading can be around some of the just transition elements. So the idea of this project is to think about how the carbon credit trading scheme could be structured from the beginning and from the start to not only decarbonize effectively and efficiently from an economic perspective, but also to ensure that the revenues can then be channeled to some of the regions that are most impacted by loss of employment and some of the social factors from the just transition element. So for anyone who's interested in this project, I do recommend you reach out to my colleague, Alistair Ritchie, who's leading on this initiative. There are 4 pillars. So the first 2 pillars essentially focus on how the ETS can be designed effectively in order to raise revenues and hit decarbonization targets. And then the third pillar is really around leveraging the revenues for a just transition. And then finally, fourth pillar focusing on international collaboration. So ASPI's done quite a bit of work around building up national carbon markets in China, South Korea, now working in India as well, and also some work in Indonesia. So with that, I'll wrap it up, and thank you all for your attention.
Kate, thank you very much. I think you would be pleased that the Prime Minister of India launched the green credit scheme here, which in fact goes beyond only the carbon markets, because in a country like India, we are trying to do something more than what is purely the economic element. And no one can say that the importance of the carbon market, it should be diminished. Not at all. It's critical, it's monetizable, it's the one that people with money relate to, and so therefore perhaps forget the question of behavioral change, it will force you to change because your wallets will look at it. And that's important. But in a country like India, the question of lifestyles and incentivizing that change is particularly important, and hence the launch of the green credits scheme, which goes beyond carbon, was particularly important. Now, I have on the with me on the dais here somebody whose organization has been pivotal in helping put this together, and an institution that TERI is very proud to have incubated and taken forward. And I must tell you, we were very delighted that yesterday we met one of their alumni here, just standing in the road on the side. He looked at the fact that Dr. Dhawan and I had badges saying TERI, and he turned and gave us a hug, and he remembered Dr. Gopal Sarangi. Gopal, you have only 5 minutes, but you must tell people of the great and good work that TERI School of Advanced Studies does to build these capacities, which everybody is talking about. Capacity building. After all, if you can't do it, you won't be able to do it. And this gentleman, really was a great ambassador for you, but the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this nice introduction. I think TERI SAS is uniquely placed globally in terms of the education that is delivering. I think that's the only institute which actually talks about sustainability at a very different scale and from all possible angles. TERI School, the tag is basically knowledge for sustainability, and we have several programs, master level programs, UG programs which are delivered, focusing on various issues of climate change, energy, water, everything. That too, we look at from different angles. As I said, we look at from the purely from social science point of view, from science, technology point of view, also from management point of view. I think that's very uniquely standing in the global south, and actually looking forward to kind of students globally to enrich and deliver the kind of work that is doing for the last 25 years. We are in fact celebrating the 25th year this year, and that's a proud moment. And importantly, we are very closely connected to TERI, and we have a long-standing interaction with TERI. We get the knowledge from TERI, and we also support TERI in many ways. So TERI and TERI SAS together are actually driving this education in a very different way globally. So that's the point that I'd like to make. And coming back to my reflections on what I intend to do, basically I'll quickly reflect, as you said, only 5 minutes there. So yeah, 2 minutes, okay. Quickly, sir. One is that the scale and the rate of transition is something which is very important, because of the fact that there is a debate is going on, because even though the broad rate is spelled out in terms of the net zero emission targets, let's say 2070, but what is important for us is that the rate is whether it will be we are going for incremental change or radical change, something which needs to be debated, because of the fact that certain areas we really need incremental change to see that the impacts or negative impacts are minimized. That's the point that I'd like to make. Second is that there has been transition happening in terms of the incentives, tools, because the focus of the present session is basically about tools. So when I talk about tools, particularly move from the fossil fuel energy based heavy system to a system which is renewable, so the tools are actually also changing. We are moving from a regulated regime towards a more market regime, so that also needs some kind of checks and balances. For instance, auctions, wind energy auction, solar energy auction, we are heavily implementing it. At the same time, we also understand that there are negative impacts, we need to minimize them. Third and the final point I'll just come to, that there is also a distortion which is happening at the ground level. For instance, we talk about decentralized energy systems, there are certain incentive structures which are going to be disconnected. Let's, for example, rooftop. So if you really want to rooftop and have more rooftops, you are basically moving away from grid. And grid-rooted incentive structures are not going to work. So in that point, I think the point that I made is whether green credits could be used as a mechanism to incentivize people to use energy more efficiently and come to a point where actually climate gets benefited. So I'll stop here, sir, given the fact that we are limited time to speak. Thank you so much, sir.
Gopal, thank you very much. I asked you all at the end of the last session if anybody has any questions. So please feel free to ask anything. You still have a couple of minutes, and these are very good people who've done very great work. But I also want to tell the panelists that if you want to ask any question to each other, don't hesitate and please do shoot. You don't. So if that's the case, then I guess somewhere along the line, either we are between lunch and anything else. But I want to thank every one of you. All of you who've come, those who are viewing us across the entire globe, this particular very interesting session. A session where the focus obviously was India. But why India? I think we need to understand. And again, I'll say it. It may appear, politically not the most correct thing to say. The fact is that as the largest country in the world, as one of the largest economies in the world, action that we take on climate change and on development and sustainability and inclusion is action which contributes perhaps the largest amount in terms of what happens in the world, excluding the developed countries and China, which are a complete ballgame of their own, and their responsibilities are responsibilities which are of a completely higher order. For us, the greatest responsibility is that of the development of our societies, the development of our economy, a much better life for our people, a life which is sustainable. We've always lived in consonance with nature, but a life which is sustainable, but a life which is much better, because that is fundamentally what all of us are striving for. Thank you very much to everyone, the UN staff and everyone who helped put this event together. To you, Shailly, your team, and every one of you, thank you very much on behalf of Dr. Dhawan. I have great pleasure in saying thank you. Dr. Dhawan, can I invite you to the stage so we can have a group photograph with the panelists? Thank you.